since you won't name drop, I will. I mean, it looks like you have Steven Seagal. I've seen DMX, Bruce Willis, people like that. I mean, you have people. I mean, just to meet those people to me would be mind blown. But you're making films with some of the most creative minds out there. I mean, some of the best actors that have ever been around. I mean, being that you're young, okay, some people may say 30's old. I know my kids do, but you're young in your career yet, and you still got, maybe 30, 40, 50 more years of filmmaking left. Okay. Yeah, hopefully, right? Right. That's what we all hope for. Um, I mean, how does that feel when you're working with some of these legendary actors like, a Steven Seagal or somebody like that? Because you know what he's done in his past, who he is. And like you said, you idolize these types of stars in the 90s. Does that affect the way that your creative mojo goes during filmmaking?
It makes me excited to work with him, but like, at the end of the day, when I worked with him, or like when I worked with Mel Gibson, or even I did a movie just recently with Jean-Claude Van Damme. It's these are the people that like I grew up watching, but at the same time, like when I'm working with them, like I step outside of myself and I focus on, like I wait to fanboy when I'm like staring at the monitor. And I'm like, oh, crap. It's like I'm watching a movie. Like I'm watching the behind the scenes of a movie I would like to watch.
Is that when you know that it's good? Sorry to interrupt, but if you're filming a movie, you're making a movie, okay? And like you have like the fanboy moment where it's like, wow, this would have been a movie I would have loved to watch when I was a kid. Is that clicking in your head? Like, okay, if that's how I feel, then that means it's right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, like I didn't go to film school. I grew up watching movies and I learned from making movies. So, like I learned from trial and errors. That's why, when you were like, hindsight, like that's how I learned. I made mistakes. I did the best I could at that time, but I've made the mistakes and learned from them. It's why I've made so many movies. I've made like 22 movies because I kept trying to do better than the last one. And so it's like, each time I did it, I'd learn a little and evolve as a filmmaker. So like, it's I learned from just watching movies and the mistakes I've made on my previous movies. So I definitely look at stuff.
Not to put you on the spot, but you said that you learned from mistakes that you learned in hindsight. What was maybe one of the number one, number two things that you learned in hindsight?
My first movie was 2.5 hours long, so that was a huge mistake.
I like longer movies, man.
Yeah, but it's a movie that should have been 90 minutes, maybe 85 minutes, and it was 2.5 hours.
Too much filler material, would you say?
I think that movie is about like 75% filler.
Oh my God. That's tough. Now, what about working with stars again with some of these, like you just said, Jean-Claude Van Damme, you said Mel Gibson. What about working with them and their egos? Are they typically humble, or are they like, hey, I'm the rock star here, this is how I've got to work?
I've been very fortunate that everybody I've worked with has been very gracious and collaborative and kind. So I've not dealt with any ego problems from any of these guys. And I think, approaching them as like,
And that's amazing because they're big names again, too. People that you would think that would have major ego. So that you've been really lucky.
Yeah. I mean, when I sat down for dinner with Mel, when I first met him, and we sat down and we just sat there talking about like Apocalypto. And we talked about like, I talked about like his whole I talked about his whole career. And the thing about Mel is like, he's not only a fantastic actor, but he's also like one of the greatest living directors, like he's made some insanely amazing movies.
Apocalypto is one of the best movies ever.
Oh, it's insanely good.